You're listening to the Dungeons, Dragons, and Psychology Podcast. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Dungeons, Dragons, and Psychology Podcast. I'm your host, Robert Walker. Today, we're going to be talking about player archetypes and the psychological motivations of the different types of players. So, there's a lot of lists out there that describe the types of players that you might encounter, and if you've ever read any Dungeons and Dragons magazines or Pathfinder blogs, anything like that, you're going to hear discussion of different player archetypes. And there's so many different lists out there. Probably the oldest attempt at categorizing player archetypes came from the late Glenn Blacow in an article he called Aspects of Adventure Gaming. And that was back in 1980 in the Different Worlds magazine. And he was trying to identify different aspects of games and mapping those aspects of games to types of players that enjoyed those aspects. So back in his original formulation, there were 4 different aspects that correlated to players: power gaming, role-playing, wargaming, and storytelling. And over the years, these ideas have evolved into very different lists and much more detailed concepts of what player archetypes are. I've even seen some lists out there that have somewhere in the neighborhood of 25 different player archetypes, which to me seems a little bit ridiculous, and it's more of a rehashing of just slight tweaks to what I consider the main player archetypes. In 1996, Dr. Richard Bartle, who is a British professor and a game researcher, published a study that birthed a widely and very frequently used classing system, which helps game developers build and fix their game structures around player types that they're hoping to attract with a game. Now, this is mostly done for video games, but a lot of the concepts can still be applied to role-playing games. The Bartle system itself, the findings help us understand the motivation of different player types. And in his systems, players are motivated by either acting or reacting and are focusing on the game world or other players. So they use X and Y axes, and where you fall on those two axes determines the type of player that you are. You can actually go online and take the Bartle test and find out, according to Dr. Bartle's assessments, what type of player you are. And that's kind of just a fun way to interact with his system and see where you lie in that realm. What I typically use to understand is 5 archetypes that I have developed for myself to understand my player motivations. And the 5 archetypes that I like to use are the power gamer, the role player, the specialist, the casual gamer, and the rules lawyer. Each of these archetypes plays the game in a slightly different way, and each of them provides specific challenges when it comes to keeping them interested around the table. So I want to talk about my method and my archetypes and go over each of them in a little bit more in detail so that hopefully you can take these concepts and understand the players around your table a little bit better. So first, let's talk about power gamers. Power gamers are one of those that most DMs understand. They want to build their characters to the maximum level of power while minimizing the cost in order to achieve that power. So they're the quintessential superhero complex kind of player. They're often knowledgeable about rules of the system because they need to understand how to exploit the system for the benefit of their character build. Min-maxing is somewhat of a sport for power gamers, and it seems like sometimes they're trying to win at character creation, even though that's not the point of a role-playing game. One of the difficulties with power gamers is that they quickly become upset with the game if the balance of the game makes them feel like their character is not powerful enough in comparison to the rest of the world. Too many challenges that neutralize their ideal build might find them losing interest in your story. After all, to them, what fun is a superhero story without a superhero? So to combat their needs around the table, power gamers need opportunities to shine. You want to let them show off their complex character build and all of the work that they put into figuring out how to make their character so powerful in whatever way that they did. It's very important to encourage their creativity by giving them opportunities to outshine some of your monsters and villains and complement their dedication to studying the system and investing their time in creating unique and well thought out characters. These sort of actions will help a power gamer feel like they are playing the way they want to play in your game. So the next archetype is the role player. It's another fairly easy to understand archetype. They're there for the story. They want their characters' interaction with your world to be meaningful and have weight. They don't care as much about the numbers, the dice, or the game mechanics. They just want to feel like a main character in your story. A role player might get annoyed when games are heavily saturated in combat, and they're not given the opportunity to have meaningful story interactions during downtime. So you can keep your role players happy by introducing plot threads that make their decisions have an impact on the overall stories. Give them interesting NPCs to interact with, and allow them the opportunity to establish relationships with the characters in your world. When it comes to combat, there are things you can do, like incorporating moments where dialogue can take place in combat, and there's opportunities for role play, and it can help them not be bored when it's a numbers game or a role player is feeling left out because they're not enjoying the part of the story that is most important to them, which is actually the story. Next, we have the specialist. Specialists are players who gravitate to one or maybe two particular character types or character races or classes. Regardless of the game you're playing in, they might, for example, always play a rogue or a paladin of a certain god, or they might only ever play a specific race. So you can recognize specialists pretty easily because they've honed their play style and character build game after game, and you keep seeing them if you have had them in previous games. They don't seem usually particularly interested in playing other types of characters, and role play and combat may or may not be important to a specialist depending on the type of specialization that they've fallen into. Like if, for example, their specialization is that they always play a bard who is very into the role-playing aspects of spending time in taverns and antagonizing, provoking bar fights, then they might fall into that role-play category more so than the combat category, but they can just as easily be one or the other. It doesn't really matter. What identifies them is that they are playing a particular type of character over and over again. So keeping them happy at your table is pretty straightforward. You just need to incorporate scenes into your game that will showcase the cool abilities of the specialization that they like to play. So if you have a paladin specialist, for example, give them some really interesting and unique undead to face off against. If your specialist always finds a way to be a flying character, incorporate some aerial battles and hard to reach story elements where their build can take center stage and the thing that they have specialized in is given its moment to shine. So next we have the casual gamer. A casual gamer is pretty common in most game groups, and you'll likely recognize this as I start to explain it. Oftentimes they get overlooked in session planning and story involvement because casual gamers don't tend to take center stage. Usually a casual gamer is there because it's just what their friends are doing and they want to spend time with them, and oftentimes they may not feel comfortable engaging in roleplay, and sometimes they aren't even that interested in roleplay. They might not be interested in the rules of the system either. A casual gamer often just wants to engage with their friends and be part of the group. So that's really important to remember. It's easy to assume sometimes when you're looking at a table and you see a casual gamer might be playing on their phone. You might think something's wrong, but try and remember that this is what they want out of the session. They want to be able to be there, spend time with their friends, and engage in a pretty surface level. Only engage in the game in a casual manner. So what you really want to avoid when you have a casual gamer is forcing them to interact with the game in ways that are going to make them uncomfortable. You don't want to center your plot around the casual gamer's character and expect them to take the lead. Let them fall into the background. Let them provide support. This is always an incredibly valuable role anyways. So if that's where they feel comfortable, let them remain where they feel comfortable. Don't push them into uncomfortable situations where they feel like the spotlight is on them when it's not what they want. And finally, the rules lawyer. So the rules lawyer is an individual that studies the rule books cover to cover and does not hesitate to call out any discrepancies in the rules as written, even to the dungeon master. Rules lawyers can be super helpful when the DM utilizes their knowledge to make rulings or arbitrate tricky rule conundrums, but they can also be a little bit annoying when they try to utilize their knowledge of the rules to turn the game to their favor, or to rewrite the story that the DM is trying to tell because that story isn't following the rules as written. I have found in my own gaming that rules lawyers can be particularly forgetful that Rule 0, which, as you may or may not know, is a rule that states the DM has the right to override any written rule. They tend to forget that this rule trumps all the other rules, and they want to go with the rules for mechanics as they're written in the game and forget that Rule 0 exists when they're trying to make their arguments. Dealing with a rules lawyer, especially the annoying sort of rules lawyer, can be a little bit trickier than some of the others. And it's because they will expect you to deal with them based on the way the rules are written, rather than through the use of the DM's ability to fiat rules. In my own experience, the best way for handling a rules lawyer is with a two-pronged approach. First of all, ask for their interpretations about rules in situations where making a ruling is important. Let them see that their knowledge of the rules can be valued, but also another great way that I found to deal with this situation is to incorporate encounters that aren't covered in the rule books so they don't have a great foothold for rules lawyering. If you're creating unique monsters, special abilities, items that they can't find in any source books, it's really hard to leverage the rules as written when rules aren't written, if you understand what I'm saying there. If you give them opportunities to showcase their knowledge of the rules, as well as creating important elements of your story that aren't in the rule books, you'll be able to keep them subdued, so to speak. What is very important to remember, though, is that despite the type of archetype that your characters might fall into, they might fit in more than one mold, or they might switch what type of archetype they are from game to game. It is possible that people are more than just what they appear to be at surface at first, and always remember that. But also remember that everybody comes to a game because they want to have fun. So when I'm suggesting ideas that might be able to handle some of the difficult things that certain types of players present, I'm not trying to tell you to make the game no fun for them. I want the most important thing that you take out of this to be, here's how you can still make the game fun for them while dealing with any potential problems that might arise as a result of the type of character player that they might be. So, with that said, get out your pencil and paper. It's time for Tricks of the Trade. All right. Tricks of the Trade, where I give you at least 3 ideas each week that can be used to enhance your campaigns. I try and keep these ideas connected to the main topic, but today, the ideas are side quests that could be used to grab the attention of each player archetype, so rather than 3 tricks of the trade, I'm giving you 5. So, starting off, for the power gamer, play directly to the strength of your power gamer with an option to showcase their most powerful abilities. For example, if you have a power gamer who's playing a wizard who has maxed out their save DCs, a great side quest for them would be to have them challenged to a wizard's duel. Or if you have a martial-based character, get them enlisted in a gladiatorial type tournament of champions. Find a moment to showcase the power that they have built by making it the center of a spectacle. For the role player, rather easy for a side quest for a role player is you just have to offer them a nice, juicy piece of story. Things like murder mysteries where they get to roleplay with several NPCs while looking for clues, or a small quest to track down a secret piece of knowledge that will help them further the plot line. Those kind of things are great side quests for role players. Side quests for a specialist. Much like dealing with a power gamer, you want to include a side quest that centers around their reasons for specializing. So if their specialization is playing a elven ranger, then a side quest of tracking down one of their favorite enemies who has done great wrong to the elven people would be a great option. Or if they always play a bard, introduce a talent show into the game. Something like that would be a great side quest for your specialist. Side quest for a casual gamer? This one's a little bit harder for me to pin down. So instead, I would say for a casual gamer, you just need a side quest that appeals to the largest number of PCs around your table as possible. This lets the casual gamer go along for the ride with their companions. Also, you could make a side quest that requires their skill or ability that only the casual gamer has. That way you sort of force them to join the group of PCs on the quest. Well, for example, if you have a casual gamer who is playing range support, set up a scenario where the player needs to go in with the sniper watching their backs. That way the casual gamer can still keep their preferred method of playing, which is in the background, but also allows them to contribute in a unique way to the side quest. So now, rules lawyers. For a rules lawyer, you want to provide a side quest that utilizes a specialized rule set, such as a jousting match or mounted combat, or navigating a ship through a storm. If your rules lawyer is playing an arcane character, for example, you could set up a quest that makes them utilize an understanding of the layering effects of spells or spell interactions, like a quest of bringing down a prismatic wall, for example, would be a great side quest for a rules lawyer. So that brings us to the end of our episode. As always, please subscribe to my podcast and check out my book, Session Zero, The DMG to Writing Great Campaigns in Any System. You can find that on Amazon. Next week, we will be discussing one of my favorite topics, which is dungeon riddles and puzzles. So please join us for that. Thank you so much for listening to the Dungeons, Dragons, and Psychology podcast. See you next session.